Well, hello and an extremely warm welcome to my channel. My name is Louise Savage of Louise Savage Muses. A very warm welcome if you're a returning viewer, and an equally warm welcome if you're viewing my channel for the very first time. So I have I feel a real treat in store for you today. I've been following the Walter Scott Prize for Historical Fiction for some time, but never actually sat down and read the shortlist in its entirety, which has been a bit frustrating because historical fiction, if I had to pick a genre, and it would be difficult to do that, but if I had to pick a genre, I think probably historical fiction is my favourite. And I think the reason probably that I haven't read it before is because the timing of the prize announcement very often clashes with the Women's Prize. And you know that dominates a lot of my reading at this sort of time of year. So I'm really pleased that I've managed to squeeze it in this year, partly because, in full disclosure, I'd already read 2 of the shortlisted books before the shortlist announcement, so it meant I only had to catch up on 4. But one of the things I will say is that I think this is one of the best shortlists I've ever read, and I don't know whether that's because it's historical fiction and that's my thing, or what, or whether it's down to purely the absolute delight and quality of the books that I'm going to talk to you about today. I suspect, I don't know, I think there are some really strong books on this list, so it's really difficult to tell. Anyway, I'm going to do this in alphabetical order, and I'm not going to rank order them because actually I was thinking about this beforehand. I will at the end of the video give a punt, not a punt, but tell you which one I don't know, I feel possibly should win, or possibly that I might choose to win. But having said that, I actually think unless I went through the process of judging or discussing these books at depth with lots of people, I would find it very difficult to choose one single winner, because they are all very good books. Yeah, so here goes. So first up is The Heart in Winter by Kevin Barry. And this is sort of sold as a kind of Western, if you like. But Kevin Barry is an Irish writer, and I've never read any of his novels before. And I just absolutely adored. The strength of this novel is the characterisation. So it's set in Montana in the 1800s in a small mining town. And Tom is the central character. And he is just completely, what's the word? I don't think I'm even going to find a word. He's quite bizarre, but he's so real and so true. He is an opium addict. He's a drinker. He isn't quite a womanizer, and I really like that touch. I can't say anything without spoiling the story, but there's quite an interesting. Kevin Barry sort of sets up his feelings, his sort of sexual feelings, quite well, I think, in this novel, because there's a lot of humour. I'm smiling as I talk about it because the novel, you know, looks at a very brutal existence, but does it sort of tongue-in-cheek. You know, I would imagine, had I not known, that I would have guessed that the writer was Irish, because there's certainly that wonderful lilting narrative variety that I love about Irish writing. So anyway, Tom, he's introduced as, he's not a miner like most of the other people in the community. He makes a living from writing letters to prospective brides for the miners, and also he works in a very dysfunctional sort of photography store, because of course it's the early days of photography. And it's amazing that he manages to actually hold down anything at all. And the novel opens with him doing this very elaborate sort of bar crawl, I guess. It seems to take him hours to walk from one place to another. But he meets in the photography shop. The only time I think we ever sort of go in there, he a woman called Polly comes in, and she's one of these kind of imported brides into the community, and she's just married this incredibly straight-laced, self-flagellating, puritanical husband, and Tom and Polly's eyes meet, and the rest of the story, I suppose, is a very unusual, raw love story, but set amidst this. I mean, they end up on the run. Again, I don't think that'll spoil the plot. Amidst this sort of really chaotic world that they're living in. And I just thought this reminded me a little bit of Robbie Arnott's novel that I really loved at the beginning of the year called Dusk. It's got a similar the sort of renegade nature of the characters and the roughness of them, and the fact that every single edge is chipped, really remind me of that book. So I think if you enjoyed Dusk, you may well enjoy this too. And it's a very quick read. You know, it's in some ways it's quite a light novel, but just captures that sort of rough and ready, raw America of the 1800s. There we go. Really enjoyed it. And next up is the Safekeep by Yael van der Wouden, who this book I read quite a long time ago, and then it was shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction as well. So I've had, you know, a really keen interest in this book, and again, even before it was shortlisted, I absolutely loved this book. So this book is set as I think at least two more of these novels are, in, I think this one is about 1960. It's about 15 years after the end of the Second World War. And I think that's quite interesting that at least half of these books focus on the aftermath of the war, the Second World War. This one is set in, she's a Dutch writer, and so this is set in the Netherlands, in a sort of rural community or rural place, although you don't really touch the community much. And it focuses on a woman called Isabel, who is living in the country house in which she grew up, and she is very precious about the house, about the furnishings, about all the belongings within the house. And she's a very straight-laced, very uptight woman. And, you know, I read this novel some months ago, but I can still walk the rooms of that house. It's if you really like a novel that has a very strong setting, I think this would appeal. And into Isabel's life via her brother. So her brother is the inheritor of the house, but Isabel is kind of caretaking it. And her brother is kind of a bit of a, I don't know, not so reliable, not necessarily very interested in the house. And he brings this girlfriend to stay with Isabel called Eva. And she is the complete converse of Isabel. You know, she picks things up, she puts things down, she's nosy, she's curious. She doesn't sort of respect manners in the way that Isabel's been brought up to do. So, yeah, they're kind of opposites, I suppose. But and Isabel is very uncomfortable having her in the house with her. She's not used to sharing the space. And so this relationship develops between these two women who would never normally kind of collide. And what this novel does is it exposes an aspect of post-war history that I felt really ignorant of. It's, you know, I can see exactly why it's been shortlisted for this particular prize with its focus on historical fiction, because you know, I thought that I knew quite a lot about the aftermath of the Second World War, but clearly not as much as I thought. So this novel, not only was it a compelling read, it's an extremely sensual novel. You know, it sort of, you know, it evokes all your senses, but it tells a brilliant story with wonderful characters, but it also educated me as well. So, you know, and the criteria for this prize are to do with that, to do with, you know, presenting a period of history in a very original way, but also to do with the quality of writing, the depth of characterization, I really, you know, I had to look very carefully at the prize criteria, and they're very, very robust, I feel. So yeah, it was quite nice sort of judging these books against those criteria. And then The Mare by Angharad, Hampshire, which I've read very recently in the last few days, and I found this book very difficult to put down. It totally gripped me from the beginning, and the mare is Hermine, I've got to pronounce her right, Braunsteiner, and she was a guard in a concentration camp, in fact in several concentration camps during the Second World War. And what Angharad Hampshire has done is to fictionalise her life. And she clearly, you know, like all these authors have done, has researched the historical background very, very thoroughly. So this is a really interesting book because it treads that very fine line between fiction and non-fiction. I suspect that I think an awful lot of the incidents in this book are things that became clear, particularly the treatment by Hermine of the prisoners, etc., in the camp. I think a lot of it comes from the trial documentation and so on, because there is a lot of witness testimony to kind of bear on here. And what's really clever about this is that the author takes a marriage. It's also a portrait of a marriage between Hermine and Russell, who in real life was her husband, and he's an American. So after the war, she marries, and Russell is not aware of her background at the point at which they marry. So the novel opens with them meeting, and so you trace their relationship right through to the end. And the interesting thing, without spoiling anything, I think it's apparent anyway from the start, is that he stands by her. And again, I don't think Angharad Hampshire was able to find out very much about him. I don't think she was even aware whether he was alive or dead at the time of writing, which must have been quite problematic, I guess. But she, you know, so the novel flits between Russell's narrative and Hermine's narrative, and that works so well. You know, when you're in one, you're pulled out of the other, and she does it really, really quickly. Most chapters are only a couple of pages. I really loved the pace and drive of this novel, and I felt it exposed an aspect of war that we don't talk about very much. It exposes, you know, the female involvement in atrocity, and I think it's a really important book in that, you know, at the moment with the rise of right-wing extremist politics in the UK, elsewhere in Europe and further afield, I think it's a book that really makes you question what you would do in those circumstances. It must have been a really difficult book to write. I think it's a very brave book to write. I suspect that she's probably had some flack for it. But I think it's so important that we ask that question. I mean, how many of us could put our hands on our heart and say that we know we would not have become involved in something horrific like that? Because the older I get, the more I realise is that we like to think how we might behave in those circumstances where we are compelled to oppress other people. But I don't think any of us truly know. Hopefully none of us will ever have to face that question. But I don't think you can truly know how you would deal with any sort of crisis until it actually happens to you. I really, really don't. And one of the things I love about this book is that she is trying to understand that rather than judge it. And that's not to say that there is any sense of approval at all. But by exposing how ordinary Hermine was, she was only 20 when she got involved in the women's prison. By exposing that and making her a sort of very ordinary young woman, it makes the events that she then perpetrates even more shocking. And that's that I would say is that this novel is not for the faint-hearted. There are some really, really horrific scenes in here, but interestingly, they are not there for salacious reasons. They are there because they actually happened. And then next up, The Book of Days by Francesca K. And I would say in many ways, this is perhaps more like some of the other historical fiction that I've read. But what's original about this book is it wasn't written in the 1540s. It's set in the 1540s in England, in sort of deepest rural southern England. I think it's southern England. And it's about a young woman called Alice who is married to a much, much, much older man. He's kind of the lord of the manor. And so the events take place in the manor house and in the church nearby. And he is, you know, as the novel opens, her husband is dying. He's clearly extremely unwell, quite unsavoury, I suppose. The house has to be calm and quiet. And so Alice spends an awful lot of time in the church, and she has a stepdaughter, Agnes, who is a very difficult young lady, and their relationship, I really, really enjoyed the way that worked. Alice finds Agnes very difficult to handle. I suppose she's in a difficult position because Agnes's mother died, and she and her father are very close, so Alice has to kind of navigate that scenario really carefully. But what I found really exceptional, extremely exceptional about this novel was that I think it really brings home the importance of church life and the attitudes towards God in a way that I've never quite read before. There's a real stillness to this and an appreciation of the church architecture, because what's happening, of course, is that it's the Reformation. And so her husband, as he's dying, has laid out all these grand plans to redesign the church, to create these effigies of himself and Alice. And that's quite kind of grim. You know, the idea of her having to have her face carved. The stonemason arrives from Italy to undertake these works. And the body of his dead wife and their children are exhumed, so that, you know, the tomb can be repurposed or redesigned to fit these new effigies. So it's a novel that looks at religious buildings and what they mean and what they can offer. And Alice is kind of, she's incredibly devout. You get a very clear sense of the way that the rhythm of life in the 1500s really revolved around church festivals and practices, and the importance of the vicars. So there's an elderly priest, I should say, parish priest, who's kind of quite old school and is retiring, and then there's a younger priest who comes in to assist because and to sort of gradually take over. So again, you've got that kind of sort of gentle conflict between one attitude towards the practice of religion, the same religion, and another. And all the time there's, you know, all these beautiful works are being done, and you as a reader, you've got this kind of sort of dramatic irony, I suppose, where you're knowing that anything that's done to embellish the church is going to put the church under threat because of the Reformation. So I found this really interesting, and particularly, I suppose, I found, you know, that I hadn't realised, because I think this is Edward VI who's on the throne, Henry VIII's son. At the time, so I hadn't quite realised how much the sort of the ideas of the Reformation were continued and perhaps conducted in a more extreme way under his reign. So again, I found this really educational. I think I loved it as well because, and this is for very selfish reasons, but I'm surrounded here by villages with these beautiful little churches that I know some were damaged and some were not during the Reformation. But I think next time I go into one of these churches, it'll give me a really much stronger sense of how that church functioned in the past. And then next up, and I'm smiling widely because this is Ferdia Lennon's Glorious Exploits, which I actually read, when was it? Last year, I think. Easter time last year when it first came out in hardback. And I was lucky enough to read it in Sicily, where the novel is set. And this is a novel that I just think, I mean, it's won all sorts of, or it's shortlisted for all sorts of awards. It's already picked up a few. It's another debut, and actually there are a lot of debuts on this list. This is, oh no, maybe two. This is the Angharad Hampshire novel. Oh, and the Safekeep. So there are 50% debut novels on the list, and I think that's lovely. I think it's wonderfully refreshing that we've got these writers who are coming through and doing interesting things with historical fiction. This book's extremely unusual. You know, when it comes to originality, I think this ticks so many boxes. And I was lucky enough to meet Ferdia at an event he did at the West Kirby Bookshop some months ago as well. And I think he's an author who is going to really shine. His next novel is about a completely different period of history. I cannot wait. Anyway, this one is set in Sicily in the 5th century BC, towards the end of the 5th century BC, and it looks at the kind of aftermath of the Sicilian expedition, which is a moment in history that is recorded by the Greek historian Thucydides. And the Athenians send an expedition to conquer the Sicilians, and it goes very badly wrong, and thousands of Athenians are imprisoned in these really atmospheric caves. So it's quite a hideous historical backdrop, and the two characters called Lampo, I was going to say Lampon, so it's a good job I looked it up, Lampo and Gelon. They are two men living in two Sicilian potters. They're unemployed, they haven't got a lot to do. And so they go and kind of watch the prisoners in these awful conditions, starving to death, almost as a sort of spectator sport. So again, although it's set in Athens, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, it also, you know, is asking questions about what humanity is capable of and how we can become desensitized possibly to certain things. And the wonder of this book is the friendship between Lampo and Gelon. It's a really touching, really comical. There's a lot of humour in this book as well. It made me laugh, but equally it doesn't shy away from the horrendous conditions that the Athenians are living in. Anyway, Lampo and Gelon decide in their infinite wisdom that they are going to recruit some of the prisoners to put on Medea, which was an ancient Greek tragedy. And in fact, they end up putting on 2 plays. And it's about that then means that they sort of develop relationships with or not, with the cast of characters that they have for the production. And I just think, and also one of the other things that's really wonderful about this, they're lower class characters, they're potters, so Ferdia Lennon's written their dialogue, of which there is a lot in the novel. There's a lot of conversation, and he's written it with an Irish dialect, which I absolutely loved. It somehow it really works. It sort of gives them this, it's not slapstick, that's not fair, but it gives them this sort of quite witty, well, it's banter. That's what it is. It's you know, the novel is full of their banter and their sort of slightly quirky look at the world. So yeah, I really, again, highly commend this. And finally, The Land in Winter by Andrew Miller. Now, I have read a couple of books by Andrew Miller. He does seem to specialise in historical fiction, and I've really, really enjoyed the ones that I've read. So I was very much looking forward to reading this, and it does not disappoint at all. Full disclosure, I'm probably about halfway, just over halfway through it, so I haven't quite finished reading it. But I've read enough to get a feel for it. This book is, his writing is just beautiful. His ability to characterise. So the novel focuses really, I suppose, on two marriages. Again, this is the early 1960s. I think it's the winter of 1962 to 1963, so just before I was born. And it was apparently a very, very cold winter. And what this book looks at is again, the shadow of the war, the Second World War, on rural English life. So the novel takes place quite close to Bristol, so down in the southwest of the UK, and Bristol, very big city, very badly bombed in the war, and this is looking at a sort of small rural community, but they do travel in and out of Bristol, and actually that's kind of quite important because you get a sense of the way the war sort of casts a shadow here, there, and everywhere, and it focuses on two marriages. So you have a doctor and his wife, and you have a farmer and his wife, and you think, oh, well, how, rural and twee. But actually it's really complicated because the doctor's wife is sort of, they've come to a rural community. He's aspirational. He grew up in Birmingham. He's moved away from Birmingham. He grew up in sort of probably quite a poor community in the city. And she has sort of had access to, she's come from a sort of perhaps more wealthy background and had access to literary society. So she's finding life in the rural community quite tricky. And he's quite a difficult character. I struggle to empathise with him, I think. In fact, all the characters in some ways, I think that's one of the things I'm absolutely loving about this book, is that all the characters have real strengths and real weaknesses. There are things to admire about them, but also things to dislike intensely. And I really enjoy that in a novel. So you've got those two, and then you've got the farming couple, but they are not conventional farmers. So Bill has come from an extremely wealthy background, but it's new money. His father is an emigre from somewhere in Central Europe. Prior to the war, he's got a very strong accent. He's had to hide that. He sent his son to private school. He liked to show off his grand cars when he went to pick his son up at the beginning and end of every term. So he comes from wealth, but he's rejected all that and has used his money to buy this very small, I think he's only got about 15 cows, small dairy farm. And his wife, Rita, is a city girl. She's from Bristol, and she, or Bristol as I should say, and she has sort of worked in nightclubs. She's had quite a glitzy lifestyle, but not from a money background at all. She's had to work really hard. So you've got this really interesting, I mean, she's useless as a farmer's wife, and I think she's called Irene, my brain's gone. The doctor's wife, she's not brilliant as a doctor's wife either. And the thing the two women have in common is that they're both in the early stages of pregnancy. So they start to form a friendship, a very unlikely friendship. So I'm loving all of that. The other thing I love about it is the characters are brilliant. The setting, the farm, the doctor's surgery, the doctor's house. We've wandered all those spaces, and I feel like they're really, here in my head. And not only that, the opening of the novel is really discombobulating because you don't really know where you are. You're actually in an asylum, but you don't well, I didn't anyway work that out. I suspected it, but I wasn't sure when it first opened. You knew it was an institution of some kind. And it opens really tragically with the suicide of a very young patient at this asylum. And so there's a lot in this novel about psychology, about the psychology of the people within the asylum, although the asylum is kind of peripheral to the whole story. but also the psychology, particularly the psychology of Rita, who I'm finding perhaps the most endearing of all the characters. And just I think having grown up in well, I was born in the 1960s, and so quite a lot of the social attitudes and things are really recognisable to me. I know their history now, but I think this book beautifully captures that moment, post-war. Rationing's over, but things are still really tricky, and the shadow of the war really hangs over the characters in this novel. What a brilliant, I'm just going to pick them all up again. What a fantastic, set of books. And I'm very pleased to have had the opportunity to read them all. Now, it's really difficult to choose which of these I would select as a winner. I think I was going for the beauty of the writing. I'd choose The Land in Winter and characterization. If I was going for absolute originality, I'd choose Glorious Exploits, probably. If I was going to go for the ability to sort of write sensually and to expose a moment in history, I'd go for the Safekeep. But the novel that I suppose has, if I, when you're looking at historical fiction, you're wanting, for me personally, and I know this is something that the judges think about with this prize, you're wanting something that can inform the present moment. Now, I think all of these books do that, but I think The Mare by Angharad, Hampshire, perhaps feels such an important book right now. It's written very simply, the language is really sparse, but beautiful. And she is really deeply questioning, because Russell, the husband, does in the novel, really deeply questioning how a human being can get entangled in a world that strips them of their humanity, strips them of their ability to look at another human being in crisis, another human being who's starving, who's lost their child, who's facing death on a daily basis, how they can look at that human being and absolutely not empathise, and not empathise to the point where they could actually physically kick them, beat them, whip them, whatever. It's an appalling prospect, but clearly it is something that is within human nature. And for me, we should be asking that question. That question is so deeply important. What is it that drives people to do these unspeakable things? We look at the situation between the Israelis and the Palestinians, for example, at the moment. We've seen it in Syria. It's not just this is by no means simply a European issue. Man's inability to sort of harm other men never ceases to horrify me. But then again, I've never been put in a situation where I've had to defend my family. So who am I to speak? But I think we should try to understand anyway. I'm sermonising now, so I'm going to stop. But please, if you've read any of these books, if you've got deep feelings about any of these books, if you want to predict the winner, by the way, I think the winner is announced on the 12th of June next week, when I'll be deeply embroiled in the Women's Prize. So hopefully I'll be able to stop and find out who's won. But yeah, if you've got any feelings about any of these novels, please let me know. And if you've read any of the past winners of the Walter Scott and Lisa William Scott Memorial Prize, please let me know. There we go, over and out. I'm going to shut up now and leave you all to get on with your lovely whatever you're doing. Take care, everybody.